The first reaction inside Russian Air Command was disbelief. Not anger, not panic. Disbelief. Two Su-27s don't simply disappear. Not like that. Not without warning tones. Not without evasive maneuvers recorded. Not without some trace of a dogfight or at least a prolonged engagement. Russian doctrine is built around the idea that even in defeat, there's time. Time to react, to counter, to survive. This time, there was none. As confirmation hardened into certainty, disbelief turned into something far more dangerous. Doubt. Doubt in systems. Doubt in assumptions. Doubt in the airspace itself. Within minutes of the double kill, senior officers demanded answers that could not be given quickly. Which Ukrainian system fired? Where was it positioned? Why did an onboard warning receivers alert the pilots? Why was there no traditional radar lock? Every question pointed toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. The engagement had not followed the rules Russia trained for. The missiles had not behaved like the threats Russian pilots were conditioned to expect. There was no long radar illumination, no predictable launch geometry, no opportunity for countermeasures to matter. The system that killed the jets had not announced itself. It had waited. That waiting was the key. For decades, air warfare evolved around detection first, engagement second. Whoever saw first usually survived. Whoever locked first usually won. That logic shaped aircraft design, pilot training, and defensive systems across the world. Ukraine had inverted that logic. They weren't trying to see first. They were trying to remain unseen longer than the pilot could remain alive. Russian analysts now understood that the engagement wasn't about missile speed or maneuverability. It was about decision-making speed. Human decision-making, constrained by procedures, confirmations, and expectations, had been outpaced by a network that did not hesitate. This wasn't a single weapon system. It was a kill ecosystem. Ukraine had fused passive sensors, mobile launch units, decentralized command authority, and real-time data sharing into something far more dangerous than a single SAM battery. No single node mattered enough to target. No single emission betrayed the whole. That made retaliation almost impossible. Russian doctrine relies on suppression. Find the radar, blind it, destroy the launcher, move on. But how do you suppress something that never fully reveals itself? You don't. You avoid it. That avoidance began almost immediately. Flight plans were revised. Patrol durations shortened. Standoff distances increased. High-value aircraft were pulled farther back. Pilots were instructed to remain alert for non-standard engagement threats, a vague phrase that admitted ignorance without saying it outright. The sky had become unpredictable, and unpredictability is poison to air operations. Pilots need confidence. They need to believe that systems will warn them in time, that training will give them options, that skill still matters. When that belief erodes, everything slows down. Hesitation creeps in. Routes are adjusted just in case. Altitudes are chosen for comfort, not effectiveness. Missions are delayed while risks are reassessed. None of that shows up in official reports, but it shows up on the battlefield. Ukrainian intelligence noticed a shift within days. Sortie rates dropped. Certain air corridors went quiet. Russian aircraft began flying wider arcs, staying farther from the front, giving Ukrainian ground units breathing room they hadn't had in months. All from 2 missiles. This is the part of modern warfare that rarely gets attention. Destruction is loud. Deterrence is quiet. Ukraine hadn't destroyed Russia's air force. They had damaged its confidence. And confidence, once cracked, is difficult to restore. Inside Russian training units, instructors began revising briefings. Pilots were warned not to rely solely on warning tones. They were told to assume hostile tracking even in silence. But training cannot replicate uncertainty. Simulators can teach responses, not fear. Fear is learned in the real sky. Every Russian pilot flying after the double kill carried the knowledge with them. Somewhere below, something invisible might already be watching. Somewhere ahead, a boundary might exist that they could not see on any map. That mental weight changes behavior. Ukraine understood this better than anyone. They had learned the hard way in the first months of the war, when Russian aircraft dominated the skies and Ukrainian pilots flew knowing they were outmatched. Now, that fear had shifted directions, and it didn't require daily reinforcement. Once was enough. From a strategic perspective, the double kill confirmed a doctrine Ukraine had been quietly developing: air denial dominance through invisibility. Not constant firing, not constant presence, just enough lethal ambiguity to keep the enemy guessing. This approach is brutally efficient. Missiles are expensive, aircraft even more so, but fear costs nothing after it's created. Once pilots believe an area is dangerous, you don't need to fire again to keep it empty. Western analysts watching closely understood the implications immediately. If Ukraine could do this with limited resources, what would this mean in conflicts between peer adversaries? What happens when airspace becomes lethal not because of overwhelming firepower, but because of silent integration? The age of loud air defenses might be ending. The future belongs to systems that don't advertise themselves. For Russia, adapting will take time they may not have. New countermeasures must be developed, new doctrines written, pilots retrained to survive in an environment where silence is no longer reassurance. Until then, every sortie carries an invisible question mark. For Ukraine, the success of the engagement opened doors, not to reckless escalation, but to selective pressure. They don't need to contest the sky everywhere. They only need to create uncertainty in the right places at the right times. Every time Russian aircraft hesitate, Ukrainian forces gain freedom of movement below. Ground units maneuver more confidently. Logistics move with less fear of air attack. Airspace denial trickles downward, reshaping the battlefield layer by layer. And all of it traces back to those 8 seconds. 8 seconds in which two Su-27s ceased to exist. 8 seconds that rewrote assumptions built over decades. The most telling sign of the engagement's impact wasn't a public statement or retaliatory strike. It was silence. No triumphant Russian announcement. No dramatic counterclaim. No denial strong enough to erase the reality. Just quieter skies. As the war moves deeper into 2025, that silence may become more common. Not because aircraft no longer exist, but because flying them now carries a different meaning. The sky is no longer a domain of dominance. It is a domain of risk, and Ukraine has learned how to weaponize that risk better than anyone expected. 2 missiles didn't win the war, but they changed how the war will be fought from now on. By nightfall, the situation west of the Oskil River was no longer fluid. It was settled. Ukrainian units had stopped advancing not because resistance had strengthened, but because there was no need to rush. The enemy wasn't counterattacking. Russian forces that remained west of the river were either isolated, withdrawing in small groups, or hiding in terrain that Ukrainian drones now watch continuously. This pause was deliberate. Ukraine had learned through experience that reckless momentum creates vulnerabilities. Instead, they consolidated sealed flanks and absorbed territory methodically. Engineers cleared routes. Infantry swept wooded areas. Drones remained airborne, mapping every movement, every heat signature, every attempt at regrouping. The Russian side, meanwhile, faced the consequences of a structural failure. The collapse west of the Oskil wasn't caused by one bad decision or one failed unit. It was a result of layered weaknesses compounding at the same time. Command delays, logistic stress, attrition, fatigue, loss of initiative. When pressure mounted, there was nothing left holding the line together. Russian commanders east of the river now faced a battlefield transformed overnight. Positions that once had depth were suddenly exposed. Defensive planning that relied on the river as a buffer had become obsolete. Ukrainian artillery could now reach targets that were previously considered safe. Drone corridors expanded instantly. What had been a static front became dynamic again. This shift forced Russian units to scramble, not to counterattack, but to reorient. Maps had to be rewritten, supply routes recalculated, units reassigned. Every change cost time. And time, on a battlefield dominated by drones and precision fire, is a luxury few commanders possess. The psychological impact was immediate. Soldiers who believed they were defending a stable line now realized they had been holding a temporary position without knowing it. Morale suffered, not because of defeat in battle, but because of realization. The realization that leadership's assurances had not matched reality. That gap between expectation and outcome is devastating in war. Ukrainian intelligence intercepted fragments of Russian communications in the hours following the collapse. Confusion dominated. Units asked for clarification that never came. Requests for reinforcements went unanswered. Orders to hold were contradicted by orders to withdraw. This wasn't chaos. It was fragmentation. Fragmentation happens when systems designed for control lose coherence under sustained stress. Ukraine had engineered exactly that. Rather than smashing the line with overwhelming force, they had drained it, isolated it, and then removed its final supports. When the push came, there was nothing left to resist it. This approach reflects a maturation of Ukrainian operational thinking. Earlier in the war, advances were opportunistic, rapid, bold, sometimes risky. Now, they were calculated, sequenced, designed to produce cascading effects beyond the immediate area. The Oskil operation wasn't about territory alone. It was about reshaping the Eastern Front. With Russian forces pushed fully east of the river, Ukraine gained more than land. They gained initiative, the ability to dictate tempo, the power to choose where pressure would fall next. Russian units east of the Oskil now had to defend longer lines with fewer resources. Their logistics had to travel farther under threat. Their rear areas were no longer protected by distance or terrain. Every drone launch mattered more. Every artillery strike carried deeper consequences. The river, once a defensive asset, had become a reference point for loss. Strategically, this forced Moscow into a familiar dilemma: commit reserves to stabilize the sector, or accept further withdrawal to avoid encirclement. Neither option was good. Committing reserves risked exposing other fronts already under strain. Pulling back risked conceding momentum and signaling weakness. This is the kind of decision Ukraine had been trying to force for months. They succeeded. By the following day, Russian movements east of the river became more defensive. Fewer patrols, more fortifications, less initiative. That posture shift confirmed what Ukrainian planners already suspected. The enemy was reacting, not planning. Reaction is not strategy. Ukraine, meanwhile, continued shaping the battlefield quietly. Clearing operations removed remaining threats west of the river. Artillery units repositioned to exploit new firing angles. Drone teams extended surveillance deeper into Russian-held territory. Every kilometer gained amplified pressure. The Oskil River had not been a final objective. It had been a test, and Russian defenses failed it.